So hi everyone. As Susan's introduced, my name is Ellen, and I work for the North Wales Wildlife Trust as part of the communications and marketing team, but also as part of the Garden Escapers project. So as Susan has said, I studied history at Bangor University and I did my master's degree in global heritage. And I've been part of the North Wales Wildlife Trust's Youth Forum for about 7 years now, and worked for the Trust for 2 of those years. Over the course of my time there, I've been part of this Garden Escapers project, where I've worked with Dr. Thomas Jones, as well as horticulturalist Lisa Toth and our new project officer, Louis Bainbridge. And we've actually got Louis here today. He's going to say a bit later about some of the things that we've been working on during this project. But yeah, I'll introduce him a bit later. So the talk today is called Beyond the Boundary, A Case of Garden Escapers. And this really looks at the exhibition that we've been running over the course of the past year. So what we've tried to do is to merge the ideas of art, history, and environmentalism together to help raise awareness about invasive plants that can escape from our gardens. So I'm going to talk to you a bit first about the history of invasive plants and how some of them came to be in the country, and then move on to talk about some of the problems that they're causing today. And then we'll finish off with some solutions that we've developed to help solve this issue. The next slide. There you go. So we begin our story in the 19th century. So this is a time when a lot of societal factors like globalization were taking place. And during this time, a lot more people became interested in finding what they perceived as new plants from around the world. And this meant that there were lots of new efforts to import these plants, most of which were transported on ships during this time. The problem that a lot of people at the time faced was that when they were sailed across the sea on ships, a lot of the plants would die because the voyages took a long time. If the plants were stored above deck, then they were under threat from the sea salt from the ocean. And when they were stored below deck, they were under threat from factors like low sunlight. And then, of course, there were problems with the amount that they had to be managed, which used up a lot of resources as well. So they were quite problematic to transport at the time. This really began to change after 1829, when this amateur botanist called Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward developed what later became known as the Wardian case, and that's the ward pictured there. So he developed an idea of this self-contained climate in this container, and the plants that would sail across the sea could be stored in this container, and they would survive for longer because they were in their self-contained climate, and they would, of course, then be more likely to survive. It might be something that today would be known as a modern-day terrarium, and this sort of really helped to protect the plants. And he'd initially come up with the idea as somebody who was an amateur botanist. He had his own fern collection, and he really wanted to protect his ferns from London's polluted air, which is one of the reasons that he developed this case in the first place. But of course, he came to recognise the other ways in which it could be useful. And so he began to test his idea and then began to market it. So, of course, after developing his idea, he needed to test his creation. So in 1833, after having grown plants and various other things within Wardian cases and seeing how successful they had been at helping to preserve and help plants thrive, he decided to test them on a long journey over the sea. So he sent, in 1833, he sent a bunch of plants and mosses and even some insects and invertebrates as well, in Wardian cases across the sea from the UK to Australia on what would be an 8-month-long journey. So of course, during the time of this journey, there were lots of different weather occurrences, and there are lots of different changes in weather patterns that the plants had to compete with. However, in this letter here, we see that the ship's captain wrote back to Ward and stated that the mission had fully succeeded. So this meant that the Wardian case had been successful in improving the survival rates of plants that were transported around the world. And this meant that more plants could be successfully traded and sold between the different regions. This then, of course, had great implications for Britain as well as lots of other regions that Britain traded with. Lots of people that became known as plant hunters liked to go and explore different places and gather up these different plants to bring back home. One example, which some of you might know if you're interested in the topic, noted by Historic UK, is Robert Fortune, who became well known for using warding cases to smuggle tea out of China. Other people would hire locals to source plants and prep them for the travel. And so they relied on the local knowledge of people to help within this trade as well. And I just want to pause here just to touch on the role of the warding case within colonial systems. Within history, it's very important to focus on this, particularly today, where locals weren't fairly compensated for their time necessarily, and that the rising trade of goods often meant that local communities were brought onto the plantations in an act of forced labour. And I really recommend that if this is something you're interested in looking into, the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew has a lot of information on this, and there's a great video on warding cases and their role in this on their YouTube channel. But then with the ability to ship a range of commodities around the world in warding cases, there became this shift in economic and natural landscapes. And this happened across many different regions that were involved in the trade, and the UK was no different in this. So one of the consequences of this were that lots more people began to become interested in gardening during this period. And it became something at the time that was known as the gardening craze. So this is where you see a lot more things like magazines and journals and newspapers targeting gardeners and focusing on gardening interests. Lots more people began to cultivate gardens and filled them with diverse ornamental plants. And a lot more people began to recognise and become aware of the benefits of plants to physical and mental health. I'm sure some of you will be aware of the whole idea of escaping the miasma of the city to go to the countryside for improved health. And that's something that played a part in this as well. But as these global boundaries were pushed and more people were bringing in these different exotic, interesting plants, there was a lot more plants being grown in what to them would be foreign soil. And this, of course, then would transform the economies and gardening tastes and the ecology of different areas as well, and would have lasting effects. So I'd just like to draw your attention to this map here, and it highlights some of the warding cases which entered Kew between 1842 and 1865. And so you can see the number of different regions that plants in this small time frame were coming from. So you've got places like New Zealand, we have places like the Gambia and Australia, Brazil, Japan, all these different kinds of regions that they were coming from. And of course, since then, we also see continued trade in plants that come from many different regions. However, pushing these global boundaries was not without its consequences. Plants that moved from these different regions have left a lasting legacy on many public and private gardens, where lots of people grow a wide range of plants. And historical house gardens are a really prime example of this. If you visited any such National Trust property or anything like that, I'm sure you would have seen some of these plants growing in the gardens there. And while most of these non-native plants don't cause any problems, there are a few that have begun to cause issues. And without careful management, some of them have been known to escape beyond the boundaries of gardens. And that's where they can start to have negative impacts on the wider environment. And I'll touch a bit more on some of those plants and their consequences shortly. So just before I carry on here, I just thought I'd put a question out to you all and ask you how you might define an invasive species. So I invite you all now to maybe type in the chat about what you might think an invasive species is, and I'll just give you a couple of minutes for that. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I can see from my answers you all have a pretty good understanding of what an invasive species is. So I have this next slide here. And a lot of them bring up some of the words that you've brought up as well about the idea of non-native plants and how they spread and how they can take over regions as well and outcompete other native species. So some examples here are from previous times we've asked this question to different groups. So you can see words here like spreads and how they can be quite difficult species and how they can be difficult to get rid of and control. Oftentimes how they're unwanted down the stem of the tree here. Of course, we have words like garden because of their role in the spread of invasive species too. And some of the larger words like non-native and takes over being really prevalent examples of what an invasive species is there too. So we would define an invasive species as a non-native species that causes harm to its new environment. Oftentimes they have the ability to spread, affect biodiversity, our economy, human health, and the way that we live. The plants are often grown beyond their native range, and oftentimes they have adapted so well to their new environments that they can outcompete native species, as many of you have shown within the chat section. They can also be difficult to remove once they're established, which can then, of course, make them very expensive to manage too. Invasive species are also one of the 5 leading causes of biodiversity loss, and that's alongside factors like pollution, climate change, the direct exploitation of organisms, as well as changes of land and sea use. So of course, they might not be talked about as much, but they do have a very significant impact on our biodiversity. Some local examples that we've been looking at have been things like curly waterweed. So this is an aquatic species, which we've seen being a problem in places like Llyn in Eryri National Park up in North Wales. So this, of course, not only impacts the biodiversity of the lake, but also threatens recreational activities there, which if the problem becomes too significant can then have knock-on effects on the economy of the neighbouring town as well. Because of course, fewer people coming to use the lake for recreational activities means fewer people coming and helping the economy of the village there too. We also have plants like rhododendron, a very common plant seen around here. We've had problems with this on our nature reserves in places like Gwaith Powder over in Pen and Draeth. So this plant can often grow very well, and it can shade out the basking spots for reptiles, which is one of the reasons it's a problem for us. Then, of course, we have the infamous Japanese knotweed, which many of you will know. It can damage properties, it can degrade riverbanks, and it can even damage things like sewers, and it can take years of the right treatment to remove it properly. And anyone that has a house or has tried to sell a house with Japanese knotweed will know how much it can devalue a house just because of how significantly it can impact infrastructure as well. And of course, another factor that we look at when it comes to invasive species increasingly is things like climate change. So climate change is set to make invasive species more prevalent and make the problems associated with them more prevalent. As our native plants struggle to cope with an increase in factors caused by climate change, like increase in storms, rising annual temperatures, and fluctuating weather patterns, other plants have the potential to thrive in those conditions. So higher temperatures may mean that the range of invasive plants will shift as competition is reduced from our native species. Hotter temperatures may mean that non-native plants that prefer arid and dry conditions are more likely to thrive. And an increase in things like rainfall may mean that plants that thrive in very wet conditions may do better than our native species as well. Meanwhile, our native species which haven't evolved with conditions like this are outcompeted by those more resilient species, and we therefore risk losing them both to these changing conditions and to the competition from invasive plant species. And I think that would be a real shame because I think that our native plants do have a lot to offer, and I think it would be a fantastic thing if we could all protect these precious species. So why is this important for gardeners? Of course, as the Gardener Scopus project, we've been working closely to monitor how gardeners can have an impact on invasive plants. So of course, gardeners have the great potential to benefit nature through wildlife gardening. Lots of people grow invasive or potentially invasive plants within their gardens, although they might not necessarily know that those plants are invasive. And of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with growing an invasive plant in your garden, and we're not here to police what people grow within their own gardens. But what we do hope is that people will be more mindful about what they plant and how they manage those species within their gardens, so that they have a minimised impact on the wider environment. We also want to understand where these invasive or potentially invasive plants are growing so that we can learn more about how they're impacting wildlife and nature, as well as the negative impacts that they might be having in the future due to factors like climate change. This will help us to make informed decisions about which plants to manage and how to manage the different plants as well. We also feel like it's important that people know when they're buying or growing plants that may have negative impacts, and that will help people to watch out for plants that may become difficult to manage, as well as reduce the negative impacts of invasive species on the environment. At the moment, it's not currently law that garden centres have to tell you when a plant is invasive. So at the moment, it is up to the gardeners and organisations and projects like ours to raise awareness about these problem plants. So one of the ways that we've been helping to raise awareness this year is through an exhibition. So over the course of the last year, we visited 3 different locations in North West Wales with that exhibition. This included Storiel in Bangor, as well as the visitor centre on the Great Orme in Llandudno, and Oriel Plasglen y Weddw in Llanbedrog, which is near Pecyn. So, of course, within our exhibition, we hoped to connect the themes of environmentalism with history and art, so that we could reach a wider audience that might not otherwise be engaged with the topic of plants and environmentalism. So that's where the idea of the exhibition came to life. So what we did is we gathered lots of different historical artifacts, and we wrote interpretation, which followed a similar theme to this talk today, following the thread of history and impacts and through to solutions, which we will cover shortly. One example here, you can see a warding case on the top left. So this is a miniature replica of a warding case, which we had made for the exhibition. And this was based on photograph evidence of what they used to look like, as well as evidence-based text about how to build your own warding case. And the reason we opted for this is because there are very few surviving actual warding cases that still exist. Of course, they're made out of wood, they're either repurposed or are no longer available. And a lot of them are also really big, so they didn't really fit in our exhibition space. So the miniature replica was the best way forward for us here. And then, of course, we had things like the letter, which we showed to you earlier, as well as some of the books that Ward wrote. And we also had an account from the Penrhyn Gardens, which listed the number of gardeners that used to work on the Penrhyn estate, which I think was quite significant to show the disparity between how many people used to manage gardens and help to manage and control those species versus how many are employed now, which is a significantly lower number. And then one of my favourite parts of the exhibition was this picture on the bottom right here. So this is a primrose from England, and it showcases a crowd in Australia gathering to look at a primrose that had been brought over during the time. And I think that's a really nice reflection on the value of our native species, showing us how they can be appreciated and appreciating the beauty in our native species too. And within this picture, we also, in the second picture here, we can also see some of the pictures on the walls, which we hoped would help people identify some of the different invasive plants that we see being a problem in North West Wales. During the course of the project, we also ran some workshops alongside our exhibition, and these were largely art-based, again, to help us engage with those new audiences. So here you can see examples of the jelly print workshops where people were able to handle invasive plants, get to know their shape and their feel, and get to know how they fell apart in your hands and how the seeds could be dispersed, and then get to create lovely artworks for them. And I think this is also a really nice reflection, not only for helping people to get to know about the species, but also for learning different ways to enjoy them through art without necessarily having to have them in your garden. We did a similar thing in a cyanotype workshop, which is on the top left here, where people were able to enjoy some native species and consider the value of our native plants through cyanotype workshops, which has a close history with the 19th century as well. Some of our workshops also looked at the value of landscapes. So, for example, we did some poetry workshops and some linograph workshops here, which focused on the idea of landscape and preserving those landscapes going forward for the future, which of course are under threat from invasive plants. We were also lucky enough to work with Sally up on the Great Orme, and she took us around to go and see some of the invasive plants that were causing trouble on the Great Orme, as well as the native species of Cotoneaster cambricus, which is endemic to the region and it's quite a rare specimen. So I was very excited to have the opportunity to be shown that alongside her as well. And then we also worked with a local artist known as Manon Aust. So Manon worked with us to develop two companion pieces for the project. One was located on our Gwaith Powder Nature Reserve, and the other was located in our exhibition space. So Aust has exhibited widely across the UK and in Germany as well, and her artworks have been in some very prolific and significant areas. So we're very lucky to have her working alongside the project with us. So we challenged her to interpret our project from an artist's lens. And so she ran with the idea of crossing boundaries. So this first piece, the deck chair here, it's meant to showcase how plants grow through the woven mesh, therefore crossing the boundaries of the artwork. And then this first piece here, the stone which stood in the exhibition space, had a video screen in it which showcased footage of those plants growing through the mesh of the deck chair. Therefore, again, showcasing the idea of breaking boundaries. So we had lots of different mixed reactions to the artwork. Some people felt like it looked like littering, like an abandoned supermarket trolley, and other people thought that it was just simply bad art. But there are also some positive interpretations as well. This person here said that they really enjoyed it. It made them think of how often we treat our natural habitat badly by dumping things in it. Yet it makes me think how nature will always heal things in the end, even if we disappear. It's so great to have art that makes us reflect about being in the forest and our relationship to it. It's a great artwork for me. And I think whether the reaction to the artwork inspired a positive or negative reaction, I think that it was a victory for me, because I think art is meant to inspire thought. And so even the initial reactions that showcased people thinking of the item or the artwork as littering, for example, it highlighted to me the level of care that people pay to the natural environment. I think people tend to notice if something looks different in the environment and if something is perceived to harm the environment. And I think that's a feeling that I think we should all have when we look at invasive species that are damaging our environments. And I think it's our ability to reflect on our relationship with the forest and other habitats that will help inspire us to manage those invasive species more carefully going forward. So what can we all do to help? Well, there are lots of different ways to get involved. Of course, you don't have to do all of them because there are so many things that you can do. But our top ones are on the next few slides. So this one here is the Be Plant Wise campaign. So this is a fantastic campaign run by the GBNNSS Secretariat on their website, and it has plenty of resources and handy tips to help people manage their gardens at home. And this, of course, the advice applies to people with allotments or window boxes, and it encourages people, even if you don't have those things, to help spread awareness about the issue as well. So the first point being know what you grow. It's all about being informed about the plants that you put into your garden. It's about trying to find native alternatives to plants and to never take plants from the wild because, of course, you don't know if they've hybridized and all sorts of things like that, as well as how it might react in different environments. And it's also about being careful about the plants that you share with friends and family, again, because of those environmental factors. And for example, a plant that's not invasive in one location may react differently in a different soil or under different wind conditions. So it's really about doing your research on that too. The second point of stopping the spread, it's all about keeping plants within the boundaries of your gardens. It's about deadheading invasive plants to prevent their seeds from spreading and undertaking the advice provided with these different resources. It's also about doing something super simple like washing your garden tools, particularly if you use them between different sites, because some invasive species can regrow from even the smallest fragment. So doing something as simple as washing your tools can go a long way to helping to stop their spread. The third point is compost with care. And this is about avoiding dumping gardening waste in the wild. It's about, if you can, composting at home or using your council green bin. It's also about making sure that any invasive plants that you do have can be composted or put into the green bin, because there are some restrictions on some plants, and there is advice and guidance for that on the website. For example, some plants won't decompose at an at-home compost bin, either because temperatures aren't high enough or they just tend to regrow. For example, Japanese knotweed, they recommend not to compost at home, and they say not to put giant hogweed seeds in your compost or the roots of bamboo plants and things like that. The second way to get involved is through a citizen science project known as Plant Alert. So this is a really easy to use online tool that helps researchers to keep track of invasive and potentially invasive plants. So whether this be plants that are showing invasive behaviour, whether that be ones that grow really quickly, ones that spread rapidly across your garden, or those that are out competing with other plants. Even if you're not entirely sure if it is invasive, you can log their actions and the way that they grow on Plant Alert. At the moment, we've had over 600 surveys received and over 300 species have been recorded, as well as over 1,000 unique records having been sent. So it really is a growing, fantastic resource for researchers, but it really is led by people within different communities, and there's always so much more to learn from that as well. And thirdly, we have our Gardener's Toolkit, which we've been developing as part of the Gardenerscapers project. And as promised at the start of the talk, I have Louis here today, who's been helping to lead on this section of the project. So if he's able to share his microphone and screen, then he'll say a bit more about this.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. Do you want me to share the screen or is this slide okay?
I think the slide is okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so like Ellen said, I'm Louis. I'm a project officer with the Gardenerscapers project. Over the past 9 months, I've been working on the Gardener's Toolkit. And the Gardener's Toolkit, in short, aims to help every garden responsibly for nature, stop future invaders, and ultimately make a positive impact on local wildlife from people's own gardens. We have throughout the website 4 different interactive resources we've grouped together. So the first one is Take Action or just Simple Steps, which focuses on simplified legislation. So if anyone's ever confused about what they actually need to do with invasive species in their gardens, they can check that, and it's just all in one place for people. We also have Be Plantwise, which, as Ellen mentioned, is a really important sort of national campaign that we've worked very closely with across the project. And as well as that, we also have terminology, which just basically, as we spoke about at the start, specifies the difference between weeds and invasive species. The big bulk of it is the plant profile, as you can see on the right of the slide. Plant profile is 15 different species of plants, 10 which are legislated against as invasive species, and 5 which have the potential to be future invasive species. And it basically gives you key ID facts, alternative plants that you can plant instead of the invasive species, as well as different sort of facts on its habitat and things like that, which are quite handy to check out. As well as that, we have a video series which contains, I think, 16 bilingual videos, Welsh and English, which focuses predominantly on specific species of plants, talking to different experts on different aspects of invasive species. So, like Ellen mentioned, Japanese knotweed obviously causes lots of issues in housing. There's an invasive species called red valerian, which does the same. So they speak about that quite a lot. So that's really interesting. If anyone wants to check that out, it's all completely free on YouTube, just through our website. And finally, we have a calendar, which literally, as of yesterday, has gone up onto the website as well, which is free to print. It's a seasonal calendar, so it basically helps you understand when's best to see certain species and what to do at certain times of the year with that species of plant. Um, so yeah, just a quick jump in, basically, just to promote that a little bit. So if anyone is keen to understand a bit more about invasive species, then this is a really good tool for you. I could probably paste the link in the chat. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm happy to if people do want to have a look at that. It works on phone and desktop as well. So yeah, thank you, Alan,
Yeah,
for
thanks,
letting me
Zoe.
jump in there.
Cool. Yeah. And I will say as well that this toolkit was developed with gardeners in mind and through consulting gardeners. So it is a tool um, with aspects to it that gardeners stated to us they would find most useful as well. So I think it is a very collaborative resource that will be useful to you. So just to finish up, just a few other ways that you can help support nature's recovery in North Wales. You can sign up to our free newsletter and our mailing list over on our website. You can also join us as a member from just £3 a month. And actually, because it's January, there is a half price membership sale on at the moment. So you can join as a new member for just £1.50 a month. And that's until the end of the month. So you only have a couple of days left on that. For other ways to get involved, you can support our campaigns. You can either volunteer, make a donation, leave a legacy, anything like that. Just head over to the North Wales Wildlife Trust.org.uk/support for more information.